We're always told that history is written by the victors, that greatness is measured in giant stone monuments and sprawling territories. But what if that's not the whole story? What if that's not even the most interesting part of the story? Today we're going to uncover a civilization that really challenges everything we think we know about power and about survival. We're going looking for the invisible empire of Mithila.
Just think about that for a second. What if the greatest empires leave no ruins? It's a total paradox, right? We hunt for the remnants of Rome, of Babylon, of ancient Egypt. But the story of Mithila, well, it suggests that true resilience isn't found in what can crumble to dust, but in what can be carried in memory.
All right, so for 3,000 years, that's right, 3,000 years, Mithila has existed. It was a contemporary to the giants of the ancient world. But here's the thing, you won't find its grand imperial cities on most maps. It's an empire that chose a completely different path, one that made it nearly invisible to the conventional eye of history, but incredibly hard to destroy.
So how does a civilization become invisible, yet seemingly eternal? Well, for Mithila, the story doesn't start with a king or a conqueror. It begins with the land itself. It begins with a kind of sacred bond, a covenant with its rivers.
Mithila's whole civilizational DNA was basically dictated by its powerful rivers, the Kosi, the Kamala, and the Gandak. Now, you just can't build a rigid, permanent capital on unpredictable floodplains. It's impossible. So instead of trying to fight the water, the people adapted. They focused on building incredibly resilient social networks, not stone cities. And their whole philosophy was shaped by this reality. Value restraint over expansion and value continuity over conquest. Don't build out, build in.
And you can really see the difference right here. On one side, you've got the typical imperial DNA. Conquer, expand, build these massive monuments to yourself. But on the other side, that's Mithila's DNA. Continuity over conquest, restraint over expansion. Its greatest monuments weren't built of stone, they were built of human networks and shared knowledge.
And this is where things get really fascinating. This inward focus, it led to one of the most profound developments in human thought. See, if you aren't busy building an empire of land, you can build an empire of the mind. And Mithila's monuments of thought, they were about to shake the ancient world.
So try to imagine the Axial Age. This is a time of warriors and empire builders all across the globe. And right here in the Kingdom of Videha, which is early Mithila, you have a king named Janaka. But Janaka wasn't interested in conquering his neighbors. No, he was on a completely different quest, the conquest of the self.
Janaka basically created what you could call an anti-imperial kingdom. And what a radical idea this was. He believed a king's main duty wasn't expanding borders, but expanding consciousness. He actually institutionalized the idea that truth held more power than the crown, and that even a king had to be a humble seeker.
And if a king questioning the very nature of power wasn't revolutionary enough for you, well, in this very same kingdom, another barrier was about to be absolutely shattered. In an era dominated entirely by male priests and philosophers, one woman stood up to challenge the entire intellectual establishment. Her name was Gargi Vachakand.
Just picture the scene. In a public assembly, Gargi poses this question to the greatest sage of the age. And she wasn't asking about rituals or which gods to pray to, she was asking about the very fabric of existence itself. This wasn't just a debate. This was a declaration that cemented Mithila as a place where authority could be questioned and where the mind, regardless of your gender, was the ultimate frontier.
Now, all this intense focus on philosophy and knowledge, it wasn't just some abstract intellectual game. No, it turned out to be an absolutely genius survival strategy. While other kingdoms were building forts, Mithila was building a fortress of the mind, a culture so deep and so resilient it could withstand the rise and fall of massive empires all around it.
I mean, just look at this timeline. As these great military powers rose, Magadha, the Mauryans, the Guptas, their empires eventually crumbled into dust. But through it all, Mithila's cultural thread remained unbroken. It didn't persist by fighting, but by preserving.
So how did they do it? Well, Mithila essentially became a living civilizational archive. Its culture wasn't stored in one vulnerable capital city that could be sacked and burned. It was decentralized. It was carried in the minds of its people, on fragile palm leaf manuscripts, and in thousands of local learning centers called tolls. You see, you can conquer a city, but you cannot conquer a library that lives in every single village.
And this archive wasn't just sitting there, static. Oh no.
During the Ohiran dynasty's golden age, Mithila's greatest export wasn't goods, it was culture. You have the poet Videha, for instance, who turned really complex philosophy into beautiful songs in the people's language, my theory. And his poetry just flowed outwards, becoming a massive cultural export, influencing art and devotion all the way to Bengal.
But every great story has its ultimate test, right? And this ancient model of survival would soon face its greatest one yet, the arrival of the British. This wasn't just another conquest. It was a fundamental rupture, an attempt to re-engineer Mithila's very existence, from its economy all the way down to its ecology.
The British Raj basically tried to dismantle Mithila in 3 ways. First, politically, it was subjugated. Then, economically, the permanent settlement created this rigid, inescapable debt trap, which just shattered the fluid village economy. But the most devastating blow, it was an ecological disaster. British-built railways and embankments completely ignored the natural flood cycles, and they turned these life-giving, fertilizing floods into permanent, destructive waterlogging. They literally manufactured a catastrophe.
And you'd think after India's independence, things would get better, but the struggle just continued. Mithila became politically invisible, its ancient, beautiful language dismissed as just a dialect. With its traditional support systems gone, a great migration began, leaving the villages quiet.
It really looked like the end. It looked like this 3,000-year-old story was finally going to fade away. But then, something truly remarkable happened. Out of disaster and neglect came a completely accidental renaissance.
The return started with art. During a terrible drought in the 1960s, women put their traditional wall paintings onto paper to sell, and suddenly Madhubani art just exploded onto the global stage. Then, after decades of struggle, the Maithili language finally won official recognition in the Indian Constitution. And today, a whole new generation is using digital tools to reclaim their history, scanning ancient manuscripts and reviving their script. It's a rebirth.
So what's the final verdict here? How did this invisible empire, this archive of people, actually survive against all odds?
Well, it really boils down to 2 very different kinds of power. There's the power that's measured in stone, which is always vulnerable to time and to conquest. It needs a central capital that can be sacked and burned. But then, there's power that's measured in memory. It's carried by people, it lives in thousands of dispersed villages, and its success is measured not in ruins, but in sheer stubborn resilience. Mithila's ultimate triumph, its greatest lesson, is this. A civilization's foundation isn't brick and mortar. It's a narrative. It is a story so powerful that generations of people refuse to let it be forgotten.
And the story of Mithila isn't really just about the past, it's a question for our future. In our world of constant change and disruption, what are the essential stories in our cultures, in our communities, maybe even in our own lives that will ensure our survival?